A fire sweeps through a marketplace in Kenya's capital, killing at least 15. Warring parties formally sign a ceasefire in South Sudan. And combating HIV/AIDS on the continent. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight's broadcast in East Africa, where Kenyan officials say a fire swept through a market in central Nairobi on Thursday, killing at least 15 people and injuring 17 others. The blaze at the Gikomba market is now out, but authorities are concerned more people may be in the smoldering ruins. Firefighters were spraying charred debris hours after the blaze erupted in the Kenyan capital. Police Commander Kang'ethe Thuku told reporters they believe there are still bodies in the burned market, and he is concerned about flammable substances in the area as well.
We have lost about 15 Kenyans. 5 are in the hospital and in the mortuary, but 9 are still trapped in the buildings. The reason why they have not been collected is because we want to confirm the safety of those buildings. Because we understand there are a lot of, there are still gas cylinders and they are still bursting. There are also certain chemicals. The safety team want to confirm to ensure the safety of those buildings, so that when the rescuers go there, they will have no problem. In addition, we have, I can confirm about 70 casualties who have been received at Kenyatta National Hospital. They are under treatment.
Well, the cause of the fire, which is said to have spread to residential structures, is being investigated. A local resident told the Reuters news agency it is believed some watchmen in the area started a bonfire that spiraled out of control. South Sudan and its rival rebel factions are set to begin a ceasefire in 2 days. South Sudanese President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar signed a framework agreement in Khartoum on Wednesday, announcing a permanent ceasefire across South Sudan.
I'm committed to respect the whole document that I have signed, and will abide by all the agreements that will follow.
I just want to say this agreement has a lot of meanings. First, the war should come to an end by this declaration of ceasefire.
Well, the agreement also provides for security arrangements that include protection of oil fields in South Sudan and developing the country's infrastructure. But it does not cover the more contentious issues like power sharing and unifying government and opposition forces. South Sudan's conflict began in 2013 as a power struggle between Kiir and Machar. Tens of thousands of people have been killed in the 4.5-year conflict. Over 2 million South Sudanese have been displaced internally, and another 2 million have fled to neighboring countries. The United Nations says more than 10,000 children were killed or maimed in conflict last year, while more than 8,000 youth were recruited or used as combatants. These violations contributed to the overall rise in the number of children globally affected by fighting in 2017. Crises in the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, South Sudan, Syria and Yemen were the main reason for the serious increases. Among the most significant violations registered in 2017 were attacks on schools and hospitals. The report covers 20 countries, including hotspots such as Syria, Yemen and Afghanistan, but also situations in countries such as India, the Philippines and Nigeria. European Union leaders are meeting in Brussels Thursday in an attempt to bridge their deep divisions over migration. There are a number of reforms on the table aimed at tackling the flow of Europe-bound refugees and migrants. EU leaders have been at odds over how to handle the issue, despite a significant drop in arrivals since the peak of Europe's migration crisis in 2015. The 28 members of the EU bloc are trying to show unity. Many of them are under pressure at home from voters who favor a tougher stance on migration. While some countries have promoted open-door policies, others have set up barriers to stop migrants who had reached Europe from crossing their borders. EU President Donald Tusk is proposing regional disembarkation platforms outside Europe, where refugees would be screened at processing centers in Niger, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Egypt. Tusk says the move would also disrupt smugglers and prevent people from setting sail for Europe. Tusk is also asking EU members to cooperate with countries of origin, particularly Libya. In his home country, a young man known only as Louis was persecuted for his sexual orientation, so he fled his native Mali in search of a new, more tolerant home. With help from an association called Welcome Refugees, he met a couple who agreed to host him in Paris. VOA's Arash Arabasadi has more on Louis's search for a new life.
Louis exploring the beautiful city of Paris, his new home after fleeing Mali, where he faced serious persecution for his sexual orientation and his commitment to the LGBT community. Louis was a team leader in Mali for a non-governmental organization where he worked to raise awareness to prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS. But one night, he received a phone call from a neighbor warning him not to go home. The neighbor said some men were waiting for him, men who'd sworn to kill him.
I
think it's important to be able to show openness to other cultures and tolerance. That's how we actually build a better world, a world of peace.
Fortunately for Louis, a Parisian couple heard about his persecution from a group called Welcome Refugees.
As soon as I arrived, before I even knocked on the door, there was a sign saying, "Welcome, Louis."
Armand and Christophe are among many Europeans who in recent years have opened their homes to refugees. Louis, Armand, and Christophe were featured in a photo exhibition called No Stranger Place that profiles refugees and hosts across Europe. Circumstances aside, Louis now lives a life he only dreamed of as a child.
When I was small at school, the teacher would ask us to draw. I would always draw the Eiffel Tower. Now I live in Paris, next to the Eiffel Tower.
African countries have some of the world's harshest laws against homosexuality. In many countries, it is a crime punishable by imprisonment or even death. Programs like Welcome Refugees give people like Louis a chance to live their lives freely and openly, without fear. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
The U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly rejected a sweeping overhaul of the country's immigration policies, ignoring a last-minute appeal from President Donald Trump to approve the legislation. Wednesday's vote was 301 to 121 with solid Democratic opposition and a splintered Republican vote. Now, the U.S. is holding more than 2,000 children it separated from their parents in recent weeks, but has been slow in reuniting them in the days after Trump and the biggest policy reversal of his 17-month presidency ended the breakup of families at the border. On Tuesday, in a case brought by the American Civil Liberties Union, a U.S. district judge in California ordered the government to return children under the age of 5 to their parents in the next 14 days and other minor children within 30 days. The U.S. House of Representatives failed to pass major immigration legislation Wednesday after weeks of debate and mixed messages of support from President Donald Trump. The bill's failure leaves 1.8 million undocumented young people without a solution, while the problem of addressing the family separation crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border that has galvanized American public opinion remains. VOA's Catherine Gibson has more.
Hundreds of thousands of undocumented young people still in limbo as lawmakers failed.
On this vote, the ayes are 121, the nays are 301. The bill is not passed
for the second time in as many weeks to pass major immigration reform. A last-minute tweet from the president was not enough to pass a bill he never fully appeared to support, even though it was based on his own immigration plan.
I said, hey, pass it if you can.
but I also want them to do what they want.
President Trump's trip to the Hill last week and subsequent tweets venting his frustration at the bill's chances in the U.S. Senate, an exercise in frustration for many members, including Republicans who couldn't convince enough conservative members of their own party.
What we witnessed today was a minority of Republicans joining every Democrat in the House to double down on a failed, broken, inefficient, unfair, and at times cruel immigration system.
Fearing the bill would be seen as granting amnesty to those young people, House conservatives voted down the bill, joining Democrats who criticized its other elements.
This bill cuts legal immigration by 40%. This bill cancels diversity green cards. This bill eliminates most family reunification. And finally, this bill hurts asylum seekers. This bill is anything but a compromise, it's anything but fair, and it's certainly not pro-family.
Republican leadership's argument for the bill:
the American people want a holistic approach to reforming immigration laws that focuses on enforcement first, before legalization.
Ultimately not enough to sway lawmakers facing tough upcoming midterm elections. Meanwhile, lingering questions over Trump's executive order ending future separations of children from migrant parents could still be addressed with legislation in the U.S. Senate.
We all would hope to be about keeping these families together as much as we can, but at some point, we need to enforce our laws.
And the more than 2,000 children already in detention? A California court Tuesday ordered the Trump administration to reunite those families within 30 days. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Capitol Hill.
The retirement of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy gives President Trump an opportunity to choose a replacement that may better suit his political agenda. Kennedy was considered a moderate voice at the institution that is the final authority in interpreting federal law, including the Constitution. Here's VOA's Zlatan Zahok.
Kennedy is retiring after 30 years of serving on the court. He has often cast the decisive vote on major issues, including abortion, gun control, voting rights, and gay marriage. He was appointed by Republican President Ronald Reagan, and he is loyal to the Republican Party, says law professor David Abraham.
Justice Kennedy's soft spot for gay rights has created the impression that he is a moderate, and certainly in comparison to Justices Alito or Thomas, he might be described that way. Nevertheless, in all of the key opinions of the last generation, Justice Kennedy has been the fifth vote for these conservative positions.
Abraham says Kennedy may have chosen his retirement time to secure the appointment of another conservative judge before the election of a new Congress in November.
It's not surprising that he would choose to retire while he knew that the Republican administration enjoyed a majority in the Senate, so that his successor would indeed come from the ranks of the Republican Party and its current leader, the president.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer warned Wednesday that another conservative judge could help overturn the court's major decisions on women's reproductive rights, health care, and others.
Americans should make it clear that they will not tolerate a nominee chosen from President Trump's preordained list, selected by powerful special interests who will reverse the progress we have made over the decades.
Some analysts say Trump's choice may well make the Supreme Court one of the most conservative in its history. Law professor Paul Schiff-Berman told VOA that such a conservative court may be challenged by a large segment of American society.
History suggests that when the court gets too far ahead or behind American popular opinion, its legitimacy gets challenged. And I think we are heading into a period where that is likely to occur.
Berman says challenges are especially likely if Democrats gain a majority in the Senate during the November election. President Trump said Wednesday his administration will begin the search for a new Supreme Court justice immediately. Zlatan Zahok, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Joseph Jackson, the fearsome patriarch of the musical Jackson family, has died. He was 89 years old. The Associated Press reported Jackson died at an hospice facility in Las Vegas. The coroner gave no details about the cause of his death. The stage dad of Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, and their talented siblings took his family from poverty in Gary, Indiana, and launched a musical dynasty. He is credited with debuting the Jackson 5 in 1969, featuring 5 of his sons, with Michael out front. Over the following decades, millions listened to recordings by the Jacksons, and Michael would become one of the most popular entertainers in history before his death in 2009. Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCorry. Still to come on Africa 54, how a parent copes with a child living with HIV/AIDS. But first, a look at Thursday's headlines.
Especially my family. Then
well, it's time now for a health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with a look at HIV/AIDS in South Africa. Lino.
And that's right. I get this. In 2016, more than 36 million people around the world were living with HIV. That's according to UNAIDS, the Joint United Nations Program on HIV/AIDS. UNAIDS says South Africa has the largest HIV epidemic in the world, with 19% of the global number of people living with HIV. In our Ask the Expert segment today, I spoke with Ndaba Mandela, the grandson of Nelson Mandela and an ambassador for UNAIDS. I asked him why it was important for him to get involved in the fight against HIV/AIDS.
Well, first of all, both my parents died of HIV/AIDS. And as you know, this epidemic has ravaged our country and the continent over. And, you know, the stigma of this disease was something that was really killing us, because it was not like any other disease that we've ever seen before. It came with a question of morality, because if you've contracted HIV/AIDS, you have been engaging in immoral behavior. You understand? You have been sleeping around. You have been not protecting yourself. You have been doing XYZ, which is nasty, which is terrible, which we cannot talk about, we must hide. And so when people contracted this disease, they died in silence. They died alone. They died with shame. So it was important for my grandfather, first of all, when our father died, to disclose that our father, his child, had died from HIV/AIDS. Because up until then, people will always be talking about the other symptoms. He decided that, no, we're not going to talk about TB and pneumonia, we're going to talk about HIV/AIDS. And that was one of the turning points in our country, because one of the biggest family, if not the biggest family, had disclosed to the world that HIV/AIDS has taken the life of their own. And so it gave courage to other families to also start talking and fighting the stigma that exists. Through that courage of Madiba, you know, our country has slowly been able to get rid of HIV/AIDS. Obviously, the fight continues. People must not be naive or have any misunderstanding. HIV is still very much alive and kicking, and we need to defeat this disease. I then was asked to be an ambassador of UNAIDS just shortly before the World Cup in South Africa in 2010, and I've been serving ever since. And of course, because I've been a victim of it indirectly, you know, it's a no-brainer that I continue to fight and champion this cause, because it also has to do with the rights of minorities, people with different sexualities. You know, it's about discrimination, the very same discrimination we faced during apartheid of South Africa. And I wish many more people can join us in this fight against HIV/AIDS, because we want to end discrimination, we want to end the infections, and we want to end the deaths that are related to HIV/AIDS.
Ndaba Mandela is also author of a new book, Going to the Mountain, in which he relates life with his grandfather, Nelson Mandela, and the political icon's legacy. We'll have more of my exclusive interview with Ndaba when the world commemorates Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday on July 18th. We remain with HIV/AIDS with a look at pediatric AIDS. Maureen Murenga, a mother from Kenya, has a teenage son who is living with HIV and a 4-year-old son who was born HIV-free. Maureen is a spokesperson with the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. She shares her own experience about finding help for herself and her children and the impact of the foundation.
I'm honored to be here on the 30th anniversary of the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation that supports actually ending of pediatric AIDS globally. When I was diagnosed with HIV, I was a young woman in the early 2002 actually. I was a young woman and I had all these dreams and visions. But I was diagnosed when we were told there was no treatment. I was given a maximum of 2 years to live. So that was compounded by a pregnancy that I had, and the doctor changed the 2 years to almost a year. He told me, now that you're pregnant, you may not live long enough because your immune system is going to be compromised. It was such a scary time, and majority of people in my country could not afford treatment. A few could in private hospitals, which was very, very expensive. But for the common person, it wasn't.
Fast forward where you are now. You have a child who is HIV negative, and you are with the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. What made that journey for you possible?
The journey was made possible, first of all, by advocates. We have people who have come out of their way to push the world to find solutions for HIV. So through that, and the US government taking the leadership in the AIDS response, managed to avail treatment to countries such as mine. And therefore, my son and I were enrolled on treatment. Then we didn't still have pediatric ARVs in my country, or pediatric treatment for HIV in my country. So I would break the adult tablet into two, and sometimes one side would be smaller than the other, and you don't know which one to give at what time. But through those challenges, we kept advocating for better treatment for children. And with time, we found better treatment for children, and therefore my son and I are still alive because of that effort. And because of that effort too, and because I was able to be enrolled on treatment, I had another baby, and now he didn't get the infection.
What do you see as some of the priorities?
There is a need for a variety of treatment for children. And I think organizations like Elizabeth Glaser have done quite a lot of work to actually work with scientists, push the agenda to advocates like us to run with it in the part of the world where we come from. As much as we celebrate the miles we have made, we are not yet there, because not all children who are HIV positive can actually access the treatment. Yeah. And some of those who access it access some not very friendly bitter syrups that could be made better. And besides that, I think we should also focus on ensuring as little as possible children get infected, because it's possible to prevent mother-to-child transmission of HIV.
Now you are also the founder and executive director of the Lean On Me Foundation. Tell us about what your organization does.
Lean On Me Foundation was founded based on my experience as a woman living with HIV. I was young. I had this baby. I didn't know what to do. And as Al grew up, I was always very protective of him. I would always hug him every time he went through a stigmatizing process. So I thought, what if I'm not there? Who would do this? And I thought I needed something bigger than just me, something that would always be there for Al, and not only Al, but other children like Al. So that was the reason I founded Lean On Me Foundation, and we work with adolescents and young women, supporting access, adherence, and retention to treatment and other HIV services.
What kind of impact have you seen?
In terms of the children that come to Lean On Me have better confidence than other children that haven't come to our center or haven't received the kind of services we give. And that confidence also supports in treatment retention because they understand why they're taking treatment, they accept their HIV status, they're able to deal with different forms of stigma, and they have already dealt with self-stigma. So that kind of confidence, that kind of building their self-esteem helps quite a lot, even in their performance in school. I must say the adolescent group is very challenging, and we see most of adolescents who are doing well as children become sick when they're adolescents, and some of them die. So we have seen the ones that in our group live, like, we don't see so many deaths with the adolescents in our group, so we know we are doing something right. Yeah.
For the past 30 years, the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation has championed the fight to prevent pediatric HIV infection and eliminating pediatric AIDS through research, advocacy, and prevention and treatment programs. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thanks, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Rwanda's first domestically built car rolled off the assembly line at the Volkswagen's new factory in Kigali as Europe's biggest car maker taps into demand for ride-sharing to expand in the region. Despite low levels of car ownership in Rwanda, Volkswagen hopes to both sell vehicles and use them in an Uber-like car-sharing system that will allow people to book rides using their smartphones. VW has started a community car-sharing service mainly aimed at companies in Kigali and plans to launch a ride-hailing offering later this year. And finally, a rollout of the much-anticipated 5G network is expected later this year, and researchers in Sweden are testing its readiness. 5G networks will be the next generation of mobile internet connectivity. They promise faster speeds and more reliable connections on electronic devices. The aim is for average download speeds of 1 gigabyte per second to become normal. Following tests with stationary users, researchers are testing how proficient the technology is when the connected units are mobile. The hope is that 5G will help boost Internet of Things technology, providing the infrastructure needed to carry very large amounts of data. And that's what's trending today, and that's our show. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. We have already learned a few idioms relating to eyes. Here is another one for you.
See eye to eye.
Do you use this phrase when you look deep into someone's eyes?
Is the yoga class over already?
I left a little early.
Why?
The instructor and I didn't see eye to eye.
You